Hey everyone, I'm Coach Joel, and in this video, we are going to finally cover pre-flop opening ranges. So in the last video, we discussed a lot of probabilities that we should be aware of, especially pre-flop probabilities, to know if we're going to have a good chance of winning the hand, to get a better sense of how our hand is going to fare against other hands, and just to set proper expectations. And the reality, again, is that it is hard to make a hand in Texas Hold'em. And a lot of hands miss flops. Really around 2/3 of the time, we're going to miss the flop completely. If we have unpaired cards, and we're going to wind up with, just our unpaired cards and unimproved. So when this happens, it's going to be hard to play the hand post-flop, especially if we're out of position. So we're going to tailor our strategy specifically to playing very strong hands to begin with. When we're in the hand, we have a reason for being in the hand. We have a strong hand, and it's going to be especially strong if we decide to open it from early position. Position refers to the seat at the table that you're at. And the earliest position pre-flop is the under the gun player. This player has to act before knowing what any of the 8 other players are going to do in the hand. So any of them could call him, any of them could re-raise him. And then often, if he's called, he may end up out of position post-flop, which can make the hand very difficult to play. The person who is in position, in other words, the person who is last to act on every street, is going to have an advantage because they have that additional information. They get to see what the player did before they have to make their action. And this can help them make better bluffs, make better value bets. It's just a lot easier to play from in position. So in general, our strategy when we're playing from very early position is if we're playing the hands, we're going to be playing very strong hands. Essentially, out of position, we are out of the action most of the time. And that's a good rule to abide by given the positional disadvantages. A few notes before we get into the specifics of the under the gun range. So we want to be opening for a raise because with limps, it's just a lot harder to win the pot for a few reasons. First off, it's going to remove an option to win the pot outright, which is just where everybody folds pre-flop. I mean, it's a great way. When you raise, the blinds fold, you get free money. It's a great way to win rake-free money in poker is just to simply steal the blinds. So by limping, we forfeit the right to do that. We also limit the option of representing stronger hands post-flop, which is going to be problematic. So if you limp, it's going to be a lot harder for you to bluff certain hands. Why would anybody believe you that you have a strong hand? Why would they believe that you could possibly have tens or better or ace king on a lot of different boards because you didn't even raise your hand pre-flop? So what we're doing a lot of the time by limping is we're relying on our hand to actually make the best hand. We can't just pretend it's the best hand. We can't bluff. We can't apply pressure. We have to actually make the best hand, which is a tough proposition to do, especially if you limp and a lot of people call or raise behind you and you end up in a multi-way pot. It becomes kind of like hitting the lottery at that point, and we want to just avoid situations where we need to get lucky in order to win, and we really can't exert any sort of skill advantage. The other thing is, again, by limping, you're encouraging other players to attack your raise and to attack your limp with a raise. And this, again, can lead to you being out of position in the hand, which, as mentioned before, is a big disadvantage. So with that in mind, when we open from under the gun, we are opening with a very tight range. And this range consists of pocket pairs that are 7s or better. We're going to be opening the very best suited aces, ace 10 suited and better. We're going to be opening ace king, ace queen, and then a couple really strong Broadway hands like king queen suited and 10 jack suited. We will open those. They're versatile hands. They can make a lot of different strong draws. They can hit pairs that are strong enough to hold up in the hand. And then we're also going to add an ace 3, ace 4, and ace 5 suited to give us a little bit of board coverage on some lower boards and add a few bluffs to our opening range. So this is a really tight opening range. It's only 8% of all hands. And this is 104 combos out of the existing 1,326. You can see that what we're doing from early position is a lot of folding. And that may be hard to come to grips with for a lot of recreational players. A lot of them like to play anywhere from a third to half of all hands. And especially from early position, doing this is just going to bleed money. There are just, again, too many disadvantages to playing this many hands, either as a limper or even as a raiser. Opening this wide is just sure to bleed money. It's too likely with 8 people behind you that somebody has a very strong hand, or that somebody will re-raise you, and you simply won't be able to defend that wide of a range. How are you going to continue if you're raising half of your hands and somebody is representing jacks or better in ace king and you're holding 8-9 offsuit? What are you going to do with this hand? You're going to have to fold, and you're going to have to forfeit your opening money. If you decide to call with this hand, you're just compounding your first mistake. So let's not make the first mistake. Let's just open tight in the first place, give ourselves a rock solid range that if somebody plays back at us, we actually can fight back. We can defend it at a high enough frequency where we're not going to have to fold all the time to their re-raises. And hopefully we keep card advantage as one of the advantages in our favor. So pre-flop, there are always advantages that we're trying to search out. And if we can't get a hold of any of these advantages, well, we really shouldn't be in the hand. And the key advantages are, as I mentioned, card advantage. This one's pretty obvious, just having a stronger range of cards than your opponents. Playing good cards is definitely a must in Texas Hold'em. But there are others too. One of them is positional advantage. So there's nothing we can do about this in early position. We're going to be at a positional disadvantage unless we get lucky and everybody behind us happens to fold and we only end up against the blinds, in which case the blinds act first post-flop, and we will have a positional advantage. But we can't really count on that. We should assume that when we're opening from early position, we're probably going to be at a positional disadvantage. So that's a marker against playing the hand. Other markers are, can I gain the initiative in the hand? So that's why raising pre-flop is so important. Having the initiative just gives you more options post-flop to bluff and to apply pressure because you've represented strength pre-flop. And then also just your own skill advantage. So if you think that you have a skill advantage in a given game, you can open a little bit wider than usual, but we can't be overdoing this. And some key things we're going to have to look for before we start deviating from these recommended ranges are just how the rest of the field is playing. Is the field playing very tight and not re-raising you with a whole lot of things? Well, if they're playing super tight, you're not getting 3-bet, you can open a little bit wider because then you don't have to forfeit your open raises by having to fold that often. If the field also is making extreme mistakes post-flop, well, then you can open a little bit wider too, because there's greater implied odds to your hand. Implied odds meaning even though maybe your initial probability of winning the hand is only 35 or 40% against what you're called by, those times that you do get lucky and make the best hand, you stand to win so much more of your opponent's stack, and it just makes the payout that much better. So, but unless those things are true, and we're assuming as I'm going through this that this is a normal scenario. We are in a fairly deep stacked cash game, and our table is not overly, they're not making huge mistakes post-flop. They are three-betting us at a normal frequency, so we can't get too out of line, and these are the baseline ranges that we're going to continue to cover. Note that for tournaments, the ranges in the early stage of the tournaments, you can still use these, but in the later stages, it'll require a different strategy for playing short stacked. We're not going to get to that in this video, so just keep these in mind as mostly cash game ranges and ranges to use in the early stages of tournaments when you're relatively deep stacked. So as we move one seat to the left, we are now in under the gun +1 territory. So now we can add a couple more hands. We can't get too out of line, but we're going to add king jack suited and queen jack suited. And we are now at 8.75% of all combos. It's 116 combos. And I'm basically talking you through those. And again, the strategy is that as we're moving one seat to the left, we're going to be constantly adding a few additional holdings. And it just makes sense from a math standpoint. There are less players behind you that can wake up with a strong hand and either 3-bet you or potentially flat call you, and their flat calling can put you in a difficult spot post-flop, especially if they have position on you. But again, as more players fold, we don't need as strong of a hand to open. It becomes likelier that we will be able to steal the blinds as more players fold, and it also becomes likelier that our pretty good hands could still be the best hand at the table. As we move one seat to the left from there, we end up in under the gun +2 territory. So from under the gun +2, we're now going to be opening 10.4% hands. We can add a few things like 8-9 suited. We can add pocket sixes. We can add a couple suited connectors like 9-10 suited. We can also start playing ace deuce suited, and we're basically adding a few things to give us additional board coverage. So the reason for a hand like 9-10 suited is to give us a little bit of deception. It's a great hand where if the board comes out with middling cards and we raised pre-flop, players won't necessarily think that we could have it. A lot of the time, if a player raises pre-flop, the average player will put them on hands like 10s or better and big cards like ace king and ace queen. So if the board comes 10-9-9, all of a sudden we flopped a monster and it's concealed. And we may be able to check and check raise. We may even be able to continuation bet for a small size. And players will put us on a hand like ace high and raise us. And all of a sudden it's a gold mine. The other thing is because we have some cards and some boards that we can represent because we raise pre-flop, we can win pots with 10-9 suited on boards that are, say, ace high dry boards or king high dry boards. Because if we continuation bet, players aren't going to put us on 10 high. They're going to think that we have those cards that they initially put us on. Now all of a sudden we're a threat in two ways. We can bluff the range that we are representing, but we can actually have the hand on boards that players don't suspect that we have. So again, two folds has really opened us up here, but we're still not getting too out of line. 10% of hands isn't a whole lot. We're adding king 10 suited, as you can see, and we're still playing a tight, solid game because there are 6 players left behind us that can re-raise us, and we need to be able to defend our open raises at an appropriate percentage. So say that our strategy is that half the time we open raise, we want to be able to defend against a re-raise. Defend means we're not just going to fold, we're either going to call or re-raise. So this may vary, by the way, depending on what your opponents are raising with, what position you were raising from, and what position they're re-raising you from, and all of that. But just assume 50% for now. If we're opening an 8% range from under the gun, we'd only need to defend 4% of total hands. If we're opening now 10%, we'd only need to defend 5% of total hands. So it makes sense that our defense range gets a little bit wider as we move across the table because your opponent is representing less strength by re-raising you when you opened from a position that wasn't as strong. When your opponent re-raises you after you've opened under the gun, well, they're representing a ton of strength and you should be continuing fairly tightly, so 4% makes sense. If you're opening from under the gun +2, you're still representing strength, but it's not quite as much strength, and now their re-raise may be a little bit lighter as well. So you can see how the math adjusts. It leads you to defending with a little bit wider of a range when you raise from a later position. As we move one more seat over to the left, we're now in middle position 1 territory. This is also referred to as the low jack. So from here, we can now play 16% of all hands. So 3 folds really opens up our range a bit, but we're still not getting too out of line. Again, we need to be able to defend our range against re-raises. There's still a possibility with this many players behind us that somebody has a strong hand. So we're opening all the suited aces. We're opening all the suited broadways now. We're opening pocket pairs down to pocket fives, and we're starting to open some offsuit broadways like ace 10 offsuit, king queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, and maybe even king jack offsuit. We've also thrown in one more suited connector, 8-9 suited. So again, a word of caution, as mentioned in the previous videos, these offsuit Broadway hands can be tough to play. If you're in a tough game, you still may want to fold them from these positions. And again, the reason is because you could wind up dominated in pots. Dominating means that these players can have stronger kickers than yours. And so when you make top pair, you wind up being second best in the hand, and it's a hard hand to play. You could lose a lot of money in those spots, especially if you're out of position, because you can't control the size of the pot as easily. But we can start to consider those hands now because there aren't as many players behind us left to act. And it's becoming a better possibility that a hand like ace 10 offsuit, well, it just very well might be the best hand at the table. So we're opening 16% now. And if we were 3-bets and we were still playing roughly that strategy before, if we want to defend about 50% of our range, we would defend about 8% of total hands. And we'd need to think about which of the 8 we're going to want to defend and how we're going to want to defend, whether it's as a caller or if we want to re-raise. When we move one more seat to the left, we're in the position known as the hijack. And this is where poker starts to become a little bit more fun because we can play a little bit more often. Now there are only 4 players left behind us to act, and we can start to open a little bit over 20% of hands. So we're adding hands like king 9 suited, queen 9 suited, jack 9 suited. We're adding a few more of the offsuit Broadway hands like king 10 offsuit, queen 10 offsuit. We're adding pocket pairs down to pocket fours, and we're adding one more suited connector, 7-8 suited. So again, the probability has gone up that we may just be able to steal the blinds without a fight. And the probabilities has gone up that we have the best hand at the table with a range like this. And also, it's less likely that we are going to get re-raised with less players behind us. So one more seat to the left, and we're now at the cutoff. And the cutoff is the second best seat in poker because there's a very high likelihood that we're going to have position in the hand post flop unless the button decides to call. If the button calls our raise, that will change our strategy post flop, but we can start to open around a quarter of hands from here. So now we're opening all the offsuit Broadway hands, including jack 10 offsuit, Broadway hands meaning 2 cards 10 or better. We're opening all the pocket pairs, including pocket twos. We're opening suited connectors down to 4-5 suited. And then we're opening a few things like queen 8 suited, jack 8 suited, 10 8 suited, and things like king 7 suited and king 6 suited. So we can get away with this again because our seat is better. There's a better chance that we're going to be in position post flop, which improves the profitability of all these hands. There's less of a chance we're going to get re-raised. And it's just, again, playing into our strategy of as our position gets better, we're in the action more often. As our position gets worse, we are in the action less often. And that's how it should be. And from the button, we are now in the most fun seat in all of poker. The button's where we can start to play 40% of all hands. So it gives you a sense of how wide we can be from the button because there are only 2 players left to act. And both of those players may not be interested in playing the hands because if they call, they're going to be out of position the entire hand, which is a big disadvantage. So once it folds to you in the button, there's a very good chance that both blinds are going to fold and you're going to pick up free money without having to pay a rake. I mean, what could be better than that in poker? So you need to always, though, be considering who is in the blinds, in particular, the big blind. And this is one of the most important pre-flop things to take into account. Is this somebody who defends their blind light? And if so, you need to open slightly better hands because there's a better chance that you're going to have to see a flop with this player. If it's a very tight player, you may be able to get away with opening close to your whole range. I mean, maybe you won't go that crazy, but maybe 2/3 of hands you could sometimes get away with if the button, if the big blind is somebody who only calls 10 or 15% of the time. So at some point, you can auto print money if they're just always folding their blinds and they're super tight. However, if they're good players or if they're looser players, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful with the hands that you do decide to play. So from the button, it's now acceptable to play any ace for a raise. You may want to even start to raise a little bit smaller. It's an idea just from the button. You could consider raising only 2.5x with your whole range, just because you're going to be opening so much wider. And you want to do two things with that. If the blinds are re-raising you, it's an opportunity to lose less money the times that you fold. And also the 2.5x sizing from the button incentivizes the blinds to call your bets. And you want them to be calling generally pre-flop because, again, you're going to have that advantage positionally post-flop. So you may want to experiment with it. It's not a requirement. You can still continue to open 3 times the big blind. It's just recommended, though, that from all of these positions, you're not opening to one size with very strong hands and a smaller size with your weaker hands. You don't want to be telegraphing strength like that and giving your opponents additional information. What you really want to be doing is opening the same size from that seat for all of the hands that you'd be opening. So maybe your strategy is to open 3x times the big blind from every single seat except the button, where you open 2.5x times the big blind with your entire range. Or you just continue with 3x as mentioned. You're beginning to open some more speculative hands like King 5 suited and King 4 suited, Queen 5 suited, some other suited hands like Queen 6 suited, 10 6 suited, 9 6 suited, 8 5 suited, a few other suited gappers like 8 6 suited, 7 5 suited, 4 6 suited. You get the idea. You basically can open up your range because you're in the best position in all of poker. You're guaranteed position post flop, and there's a really good chance you're just going to win the blinds for free. So now is the time to play loose, whereas under the gun and under the gun +1 were the times to play tight. And as we go one more seat to the left, we are now in small blind territory, and small blind is one of the most interesting seats because when it folds to you, there's actually a very high chance that you're just going to win the blinds outright because the big blind is going to be dealt a lot of trash. So it means that there's only one player left that you need your bet to get through to win starting pot of your small blind and the big blind's big blind. So you can open 44.5% of hands. This is roughly 590 combinations. It's a very wide range. You're now opening basically any 2 cards, 8 or higher. You're opening more connected cards like 10-9 offsuit, 8-9 offsuit. You're opening some more suited gappers, suited hands like 8-5 suited, 10-6 suited. It's just a slightly wider range from the button, but it's potentially a tougher spot to be because if the big blind called you, unlike from the button where you're going to be in position for the hand, from the small blinds, you're going to be out of position. So it's something to keep track of. If the big blind is somebody who defends his blinds religiously, it's very hard to get this kind of steal attempt through. You're going to want to open tighter than this because there's a good chance you're going to end up out of position having to play post flop, and that's a tough spot to be. So you want your card advantage to be stronger in that case, and you may have to fold your small blind and concede the pot a little bit more. Also, the big blind may start 3-betting you aggressively because he knows that you're opening this wide range. In that case, you need a strategy. And if you want to, again, defend roughly half of your opening range, that's a very wide defense range. You're opening 590 combinations. Well, now you're defending 295 combinations against a re-raise. So you're going to be doing a lot more light 4-betting. You're going to be calling with some hands that like maybe you'd never even consider calling from if your open raise had been attacked after you raised under the gun or under the gun +1. And it just creates kind of these crazy dynamics in the blinds because both players are playing with looser ranges, and it's kind of this elaborate game of chicken that can be a high variance thing. So I think that's one of the reasons why in casinos often players in the blinds agree to chop. They agree to chop the pot if it folds to them in the blinds, and they do this because a lot of casinos will not take rake if that happens, and B, they just don't really want the the crazy variance and the sometimes blind versus blind confrontations can become not only aggressive but kind of hostile, and they don't really want that dynamic with the person sitting directly next to them. They want a more casual experience, and they're happy to just chop and avoid all that craziness in the blind versus blind war. But online, this is something you very much need to keep track of, because there is no chopping in the blinds online. You need a strategy, and you need to know how to defend when you open from the small blind and the big blind is re-raising you. And then once you get to the big blind, well, that's great. It's folded to you in the big blind. You just won the small blind for free, and there's nothing left to do. It's pretty sweet, especially when you're holding a hand like deuce 7 offsuit. You get to win money with that hand. Sometimes it's fun to even show the hand and kind of have a laugh with the players at the table. So these are the opening ranges to follow. Again, we are avoiding limping. We're playing very tight from early position. We're expanding our range as we get into later position, and we're only deviating from these chart table ranges if we have a reason to. If the table is doing something that we think we can exploit, if they're making mistakes, if they're not re-raising us, we can open a little bit looser. If the reverse is true, we may have to open even tighter than this. So this is all a baseline to help you get started, and then really pay attention to your table, make the right adjustments, and ultimately, if there's one takeaway from this, it's that playing fewer hands, playing better hands than your opponents is going to make you money in the long run and give you significant advantage. So I hope that helps, and we are moving on to video number 6.